get to the questions at the end, and I will try to address all of them in much depth as possible. Please try to put those in the Q&A box. We have the chat box going, just sort of sharing where we're coming from and things of that nature, but please get the questions in, and I will try to do this overview sort of as efficiently as possible so that I can answer your questions. So just again, a little bit of background on the Explorers Club for all of those who aren't members or former grantees, or who are tuning in, maybe seeing this recorded on YouTube or elsewhere. The Explorers Club was established in 1904. It has 3,500 members. There's a historic headquarters in New York City, but there are 35 chapters worldwide, and our mission is dedicated to scientific exploration around the world of all different field science disciplines. And really our grant programs reflect that. So this little chart I find useful in a rundown of our programs. And I think you will see there are many programs that we offer, and some with a little bit of overlapping criteria, but all more or less on the same timeline. We're right in the heart of the application cycle right now. So that's sort of the timing in that we wanted to do this sort of webinar, and we'll hopefully be doing these for all of our other programs and have our committee chairs going into more depth on each program. But sort of going in terms of chronological order, both in when they were established and sort of at the point of the career where we target the grants, we have the Rising Explorer Grant, which is supported by the Youth Activity Fund, one of our oldest endowed grants, which is currently open now. The average amount is about $1,200, and these are for primarily undergraduate students, but we do have a few high school students that we fund each year. And this program has been heralded by Marla Daly and Kristen Larson for many years now, doing an excellent job. I'll get to another slide where I'll sort of go into more depth, but just sort of going down the line with each of these. Exploration Fund is for graduate postdoc students, but there actually isn't a age limit on this, but given the amount that it funds for more established explorers that may be looking for larger funding, this grant might not be quite enough. We have a Rolex grant, which is at the amount of $10,000 for undergraduate postdoc researchers. We have our C grants, which is sponsored by the Stevenson Foundation, which is $10,000 each. We give 5 of those. This is one of our newer grants. This is sort of capped at 35 years of age and ocean related. Exodus Exploration Without Boundaries, another newer grant, which was established with one of our travel partners, Exodus, that is really trying to open and broaden the definition of exploration, and in that opening the definition of what it means to be explorer. So it's, beyond being over 18 years of age, sort of open. We have our Fjallraven Fieldwork Grant, $5,000. We give 2 of these each year. This also is sort of looking at early career, but is also open in terms of age criteria. Then there's a very special program, the Adventure Canada Young Explorers Program, which is on a different timeline than all of these other grants that are currently open, which usually opens in about January or March. And this is for Adventure Canada is the Explorers Club Northern Travel Partner. So they go up to the Arctic in expedition cruise vessels. So they make available a few berths on different voyages a year. So applicants apply to do a very specific project based on the itinerary of that voyage. And that is for 30 and under. And then a very popular grant program that we launched a couple of years back is a collaboration with Discovery, which has a rolling deadline. So as it's open all year round, but it is reviewed 3 times per year. The average award that is given is around between $30,000 and $40,000. But we've funded smaller grants as well, which are, we've even funded a grant at $6,000. But then there have been some much larger grants at $100,000. And I'll go into more about discovery, which I'm sure everyone is excited to learn more about. And that is open. So that one also has no sort of age limits. There is a perception that all of our grants are student grants. And although we do really try to support explorers earlier in their career where they may not be able to have those opportunities of personal fundraising or connecting with donors where grants are really important, we do have a lot of opportunities, and actually the majority of our funding goes towards explorers who are over that 35 plus age limit. So the Explorers Club Rolex grant is our oldest relationship with a brand sponsor. So our committee brings a group of finalists that Rolex helps us select. These are $10,000 each. There's usually a technology component in terms of cutting edge technology that Rolex is interested in seeing. They have their perpetual planet focus, which has to do with sustainability, understanding our planet in a deeper way. One note that I wanted to make is that there are other Rolex grants that the Explorers Club is not affiliated with, that sometimes when people do the broad Google searches, they come across the Award for Enterprise or the Our World Underwater Scholarship. So that's just to differentiate from our Explorers Club Rolex grant. And on each slide going through these programs, I just have a little grantee highlight with Anna Nochel, who is doing some microbiome research on manta rays in the Gulf of Mexico. Here you can see her doing some lab work. And one aspect of all these expeditions, there's usually some lab component and also a field component as well. So I'm going to move on to our Discovery Explorers Club Expedition grants. So like I said, the average grant is about $40,000. But if you're proposing a $150,000 grant, it's going to be a lot more competitive. There is also sort of a chunk of money that we propose for each cycle for the final approval. That if you are requesting a higher budget amount, it is more competitive and less likely that that grant will be approved. But we've had so many incredible grantees come through this program, over 30 now, who have done projects all around the world. I see we have our president, Richard Garriott. Welcome, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much, Trevor. I apologize. I joined with a phone earlier, and I know it didn't connect properly. But and pardon me for interrupting your flow, because obviously you're giving people some really great information. But I just was wrapping up another important meeting we had here at headquarters, and I wanted to pop over because I know you have just an amazing cadre of people interested in these grants, and I wanted to throw in one or two thoughts for all of you, which is that I joined the Explorers Club in the late 1990s, so just over 20 years ago. And when I joined, honestly, I am sure all of you that are thinking about applying for any of these grants that Trevor has been telling you about, you are all well more qualified than I was to join the club than I was at the time that I joined the club. And I mean that very sincerely. We would be so excited to have any of you. Please do apply for these grants. Please do apply for membership in our Explorers Club. Because what I think this club will do for you is the same thing that I believe that it did for me, who was way less qualified than you are, which is, there are sort of three kinds of people that walk in the doors, metaphorically, of the club. There's the young explorer in the early phases of their career, that have a great idea for an expedition, but may not have the expertise they need to pull it off, and may not have the scratch, the cash that it takes to pull it off. And but that's the great thing about the Explorers Club is first you'll find all the expertise you need in other fellows that you meet, in this organization. That whatever your field of research is, whatever the region of research you want to go work in, physically. Those people are already members of this club. But more importantly, the patrons of various aspects of research, and that's what Trevor's really already telling you about. These are the formal patronages these grants are the things that people have already set aside to support areas of research or areas potentially in areas of the world or particular categories of types of researchers. That's just the start of what this club does very well. This is how people get together and open up frontiers, open up fields of research, and that's at least I'm the poster child for that. As president now, right as I became president, I actually finished an interesting quadriplet or quad something. Where I'd already been from the North Pole to the South Pole. I had already orbited the Earth from space. In 2008, I spent 2 weeks on the International Space Station. But right as I became president 2 years ago, March, I made a deep dive down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. So I happen to be the only explorer who's been pole to pole, space to deep. And the point was, all of that was done through this network of the Explorers Club. And so, again, whatever it is you are interested in doing as an explorer, I'm confident the club can help you. I know for a fact we want to help you. We are in the business of helping explorers, do field work, bring back important information to the world. And so, anything we can do to help you, trust me, that's our bread and butter. There's nobody better to know than Trevor to pull this all off. He is head of our entire grants organization, and so you're getting great information already. I know from him already for the little bit I've already been listening into, but please know that this is just step one. Come once, come often. We're here to help you. Back to you, Trevor.
Thanks so much, Richard. That was great. And I'll just add to that. In my personal experience, sort of as Richard was alluding to, the expedition funds that pay for your plane tickets, that pay for your food while you're out in the field, it's kind of small in comparison to the benefits of the club as a community and a network of people that can not only lead to much more funding, but also the expertise and experiences and access to the types of projects that I think we all dream of doing. So this is all just as a way of getting your foot in the door, something that I'll talk about later, as well as you don't need to be a member of the Explorers Club to apply to one of our grants. Although being in the communities and circles and part of the conversation is certainly helpful, but we kind of use our expedition grants to pull people into the club as we grow as an organization. And certainly, as I'm looking at this slide for the Discovery Explorers Club expedition grants, we've seen, members like Peter Tattersfield, who applied for one of our grants and was able to find the SS Independence on his expedition in Baja, Mexico, and Isla Margarita. This is really cool because it really does define, discovery. He proposed that he wanted to look for this lost steamship, also known as the Tom Sawyer's steamship, because it had the actual historical Tom Sawyer as part of the rescue crew. But that is all to say that, real results are coming back from these expedition grants. And that's been something really amazing to see, in Discovery, but also in all of our other expedition programs, is that we're coming back with all kinds of scientific publications and peer-reviewed journals, and the reports that we see. There's a lot of new knowledge being generated from the field. So I'm just going to go into, one piece of the Discovery.
Hey, Trev, just real quick, I unshared your screen while Richard was talking.
Okay.
You have to reshare real quick.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm just going to reshare. Okay, good.
Perfect. Thanks, man. Sorry.
Cool. Yeah, so we're just looking at Peter Tattersfield, who is one of our Discovery Explorers Club expedition grantees, who's actually received 2 grants to continue his work in Isla Margarita. He was able to deliver results, which is always a very good sign of being able to continue your work. He said he was going to look for the ship. He found it, and we've been able to support him in analyzing the human remains that was off the beach of the wreck, and further his work in that area. I'm just going to move on to one very unique aspect of the Discovery Explorers Club expedition grants is the storytelling aspect. So there are other comparable programs of other organizations that have storytelling grants. That's not to say that there isn't hard database rigorous science behind the expedition, but that one component of this is communicating it to a broad audience, which has always been part of the Explorers Club mission. So the one different part of the Discovery application is that there is a small pre-application, which is basically an abstract and some biographical data and sort of the broad strokes of the expedition. And then going into the full application, there is a video statement. So I wanted to include a little bit of demystification around this video statement, which I think for many researchers and explorers who are trying to get to apply to this may be a bit intimidating. So off the bat, the video statement does not need to be a highly produced cinematic masterpiece in order to be successful. You know, I myself as a filmmaker, an expedition filmmaker, know how much it takes to shoot and edit something that is compelling and also, you know, under 2 minutes in length. What we're really looking for in this is a clear, comfortable, excited delivery of what the idea and goals are of your expedition. So successful video statements in the past have been recorded even on a cellular device or a laptop. And in order to do that in the best way using a well-lit room, I just kind of pulled this off the internet, just a little super basic framing of how to light yourself so that we can see your face and not side lit, not backlit. This is all things that many of you probably have learned over our now years of doing things over Zoom and virtual meetings. But really in this recording, you know, practicing what you're going to say. So you're not reading this, you know, off of a piece of paper. So you can really engage and make eye contact and really tell the audience of our committee members what your expedition is about and why you're excited to do it. And really sometimes when the camera is on, it can tend to flatten the excitement. And sometimes it can be a bit strange talking to a little lens there, but really trying to amp up what you're most excited about. And if you happen to have access to someone who could help you record some B-roll, which just means sort of cutaway images to put over or to edit something, that's great. I wouldn't dissuade anyone from going a little above and beyond on their video statement, but that's all to say that it's not absolutely required. And we have funded many projects with very simple but efficient, energetic, and excited video statements. And this is all in terms of any successful explorer, researcher, scientist could utilize these types of things in their public presentations, whether they're presenting at conferences or whether they're talking about their research to a broader audience. So happy to talk more about this if anyone has questions. So our Fjallraven Fieldwork Grant is one of our other sponsored grants that is an amazing opportunity. There are only 2 awarded each year, but this grant really has an amazing sort of mentorship aspect baked in with it with Fjallraven, which is our apparel partner, which has sent also a little bit of gear along with our grantees. One of our grantee highlights is Mai Fami, who is doing an incredible piece of research on a lost forest fragment in Madagascar. Here she is with some of the sampling that she was doing with the very cute and charismatic lemurs, but she was actually doing work with leeches, using them to do basically taking the DNA out of the leeches to see what are the different species that they were feeding on. So some really incredible grantees coming through this program. The Exodus partnership that we have is a new grant. We're really excited to build this program. It's called the Exploration Without Boundaries grant because we really believe that explorers come from all different types of backgrounds. They don't necessarily have to come through a traditional academic route. They may not fit into this category of a young student. They may be coming to exploration or their dream of doing these types of projects. later in life, and they may come at it in a different from a different background. And here we have one of our grantees, Felipe Peranio, who is a high alpine mountaineer and big wall climber from Ecuador, but his project was in Peru, where he had been climbing and noticing all of these archaeological structures from his perspective high on the wall. So working with archaeologists, he was able to launch a really successful expedition. So that's just one example of one of the Exodus grantees. The Stevenson Exploration Advancement Program, or SEA grant, is a grant that we give supporting marine science and exploration and also conservation. This is an early career grant, so this is looking to support explorers early on, and we give out 4 $10,000 grants with this program. This was just the first year. This past cycle will be entering the second year of the SEA grant, as well as the Exodus grants. Neha Acharya Patel was one of our grantees from last cycle, and she was doing some pretty amazing research in the Pacific Northwest in the Great Bear Rainforest, diving in some really, really cold waters, working with rockfish that I didn't know were somewhere over 200 years old, but doing some really, really amazing work. We did also have some explorers in warmer waters. There were 2 grant projects going on in Indonesia as well, and some really exciting work coming out of the Stevenson program. The Exploration Fund is one of our older grants. It is not a partner grant, but is one of our endowed funds. So the contributions from members and our past endowments make the Exploration Fund possible. We've also done coin drives where we've sold commemorative coins. Thank you, Richard Garriott, for being a supporter. We're going to come out with another one this year. But these range from $2,500 to $5,000, and they're typically postdoctorate or doctorate researchers who are doing projects. And I will mention that with the Rising Explorer Grants Exploration Fund, you don't necessarily need to be the expedition leader. You can use the funds for this grant to support your travel or your participation in another project that might be led by your supervisor or professor, etc. But there is actually technically no age range to this particular grant. One of our grantees was Trent Tresh, who was doing a parafoil deployment project, which I found really cool. We don't get a ton of aeronautical or space grantees coming through, but this was a really cool one. He was essentially testing the ergonomics of a parafoil deployment. So if you were going to bust out of your modules that was descending, where was the best place to put the handle to deploy your parafoil, essentially your escape parachute. So that was a really cool project from a few years back. And that brings me to the Rising Explorer Grant, which is supported by an endowment called the Youth Activity Fund, which is one of our oldest programs run by Marla Daly and Kristen Larson, who've funded many of our high school and undergraduate students over the years. The average grant is $1,200, which we've seen grantees spread a long way. It's not a ton of money, especially the way airfare is these years. But like I said, oftentimes these are research assistants or undergraduate students that are joining larger expeditions. So for example, Allison Dombrowski, who was doing Gobi Desert paleontology, she was on a team of about 30 people in Mongolia, doing this incredible research out there on the late Devonian. So that brings me to the Adventure Canada Young Explorers Program. Embarrassingly, I am in the photo. You can just ignore that. I was part of the first group of young explorers in 2016. This program was put together by board members and former board member Stefan Kinberg and Milbury Polk, who wanted to bring young explorers and researchers on Adventure Canada expedition cruises. Adventure Canada is our northern travel partner that does these incredible voyages to the north, to some of the most difficult to access Arctic communities in Nunavut and Greenland. So these explorers are given a chance to adapt a project that is fit to the itinerary on the ship. And this is usually announced in the spring, so stay tuned on the Adventure Canada website for this one. This is not one of the ones that is currently open for applications at the moment. So that was an overview of all the programs. As you can see, there are a lot, and there are actually even a few chapter-specific grant programs that I won't get into today. Those are managed by the chapter chairs and the leadership of individual chapters. But with almost all of these applications, you have your basic biographical data, which includes your name, all of the confidential sort of address, citizenship, all of that, which is required in any type of application, whether you're applying to a university or for us to give you money for your expedition. The title of your expedition should be, not too much jargon. It doesn't need to be super, quote unquote, dumbed down, but it can be somewhere in the middle where you give a gist of what you're doing and some, energy and pizzazz to it to get our committee members who read many applications, get them excited about it. The short description is something like an abstract, 150 words, where you get to the goals and some basics on the methods. But in the project description, you'll get more into the hypothesis, methods, potential impact. So you really want to include all those three. Impact is important. We do want to see what results are coming from the field, and we want to see thinking about how this will impact the discipline in which the expedition is operating in. Any affiliations are important. If there's a university or part of the research or national governments, it's important for us to know those types of affiliations, which goes along with permits. Oftentimes, you will want to have some idea of the permits that you'll want on the time. At the point of application, you may not be able to have all the permits entirely secured, but it's important for us to know that you are aware of which permits are required. And almost every expedition will require some kind of permit of some sort. Very rarely do we find any type of expedition that doesn't require some kind of permission, whether you're collecting data that is invasive or non-invasive. The budget is just sort of the costs, and I'll go more into budget a little bit later. Your expedition costs, your plane tickets, your food, whatever kind of materials, tools you need. Your team members, and we do require and encourage people to have at least one local collaborator. Now, whatever local means may have a relative sort of non-objectiveness to it, subjectivity to what is local or non-local, but at least somebody who is on the ground, that it's not coming in from outside and with no kind of representative from the place where the expedition is going on, or somebody who has that tie to the place itself. A basic CV or resume, which is relatively up to date, giving the education and background. And these CVs or resumes will look different based on the program. So a resume that's for the Exploration Without Boundaries grant, as opposed to the Discovery Grant or Exploration Fund, may look fairly different. And then, as I mentioned and went into more detail, the pre-application and the video statement for the Discovery Grant. So that pre-application being part of the two-tiered, because these are for larger amounts of money, and because we do get a larger volume of applications, that is the purpose of the pre-application. So what do we fund? Maybe we should have started with this much earlier, but we basically fund all scientific field disciplines that I'm aware of, including biological sciences, archaeology, anthropology, paleontology, earth sciences, ecology, astronomy. And so this is all, and it can be framed in different ways. Again, depending on the program, there may be other types of projects that are about bringing back knowledge and results to the field and sharing it, whether it's sharing it through a peer-reviewed journal or through a documentary. There are different ways in terms of disseminating that knowledge. while there may be lab components of a project, we do not purely fund lab or archival work. So there are many, whether it's a NSF grant that is doing lab work, and that is wonderful, and that is also a way of contributing to knowledge. There's always been part of the DNA of our organization is going out into the field. And while we may have different definitions of what the field is currently, that is, and how, rugged it is and all of those things, there is some subjectivity to that. But that's all to say, simply lab projects or archival, though very, very important, are not within the parameters of our current grant programs. That said, on the other side of the spectrum, while field work can be rugged and adventurous, we're not in the business of funding expeditions that are purely for a physical feat. And that means sort of adventure sports, while they're maybe highly entertaining and very impressive and part of aspects of what club members have gotten recognition for in the past, our grant programs are more focused on some aspect of it being based in research or collecting data from the field, or some storytelling aspect that is not necessarily getting to the top of a mountain or doing some type of extreme adventure. So disqualifications, I'll try to go through this relatively quickly. Like it already says, not a purely physical feat. Projects that are unnecessarily dangerous or harmful to participants or the environment or research subjects. Obviously, we want to, part of our code of ethics is doing no harm as explorers. Any illegal activity or blatant disregard for permits. This is an important one, is that we do not fund projects that are primarily a business endeavor or commercial activity. Again, a lot of these things, it's sort of on a case-by-case basis. What that means is sort of subjective of what is a commercial activity. Sometimes there's some aspects of that involved, but mostly we're looking at research, which is pretty easy to tell from something that is a commercial endeavor. We already talked about lab work and archival projects, and also applicants with no prior experience in the area or collaborators that show that it is a legitimate expedition. While we do support us going off and exploring, and oftentimes exploring is going off into the unknown and what you do not know yourself, there needs to be some demonstration of sort of seeds that there's an understanding of where you're going and what you want to be doing. So it's not to say that you're not to be going into the unknown and uncovering new knowledge, but sort of based on feasibility, what we are able to support. The OFAC compliance, this is the Office of Foreign Asset Control. There's a list of countries. So if you want to go to the treasury.gov/resource center, there's a list of countries that simply are not allowed to wire funds through those countries. Some of those include Somalia, Cuba, Iran. And although there may be very worthwhile projects doing there, it's simply, as our nonprofit status, we're not able to fund projects in those areas. And that's also, there's a very specific restriction on China that we cannot consider research proposals in China or by Chinese citizens. That's pretty much all NGOs that are based in the US have to abide by this. So what is the criteria? So you may all be thinking, what is going on in the heads of these reviewers? And given that we get, hundreds and hundreds of amazing applications, how do we judge them? How do we score them? So different programs have slightly different rubrics on how they score them and how the committees work. But in the broad strokes, for all of you to understand, there's generally judged on the basis of the contribution to science or exploration. Is this generating new knowledge or understanding in that given field? The methods and approach, how ambitious or innovative are the methods employed in this expedition? Feasibility. So whether the contribution may be massive, methods may be very interesting, we have to take into account feasibility if the applicant is able to do it or shows the preparation, the team members, the prior knowledge in order to make it happen. Obviously, in the past few years, due to the global pandemic, there have been many adjustments that we've had to make, and obviously incorporating COVID mitigation and planning around traveling to certain areas still is something that is important to at least have an idea of what travel will be like in some of those areas. Storytelling is not an aspect of every single grant program, but certainly is for Discovery and Exodus, which is not necessarily how flashy or commercially media-centric, media-genic they necessarily are, but how well applicants are able to communicate their research, because it's all about how you communicate it. Because I believe that almost all of our grantees have an amazing story to tell. And so certain elements of these applications are just pushing the applicants to just demonstrate that a little bit more. So budget. There are a couple pieces of advice that I have on budgets. This factors into the feasibility score. While frugality is appreciated, there will be questions that arise if the budget seems too small, if the proposed idea doesn't really match up. Certain areas of exploration are just have a base cost that is quite high. Underwater archaeology, aerospace, these are things that oftentimes when you need a lot of equipment, it's appropriate that the budget match up to those areas. And we do have specialists that look into this. So, and oftentimes we will respond to the applicant if there's something that doesn't seem to match up. Business class flights, these are large salaries, gifts, large percentages used for non-expendables, like, it says, if it's buying a vehicle or a red camera, that's a, $20,000 camera. This can't be funded by our grant programs, whereas, smaller expendables, parts of documentation is important, and necessary tools to be successful in expedition. This makes total sense. And we do take this on a case-by-case basis. And while we encourage grantees to seek additional funding, and we encourage grantees to apply to multiple programs, only one award will be awarded per expedition. So this is something that I've seen in the past where I guess there was a little bit of a misunderstanding in some aspects, where if you could apply for multiple programs, there would be applicants who would, to fulfill their expedition budget, they would need Rolex, Fjallraven, Sea Grants to all happen, which we cannot. Sort of the alchemy of all the different application programs, we cannot award multiple grants, and that also just slices the percentage razor thin. And so just to repeat that, so it's extra cleared, one may apply with the same expedition to multiple different grant programs, but the budget should be aligned to winning one of those grants, and feasibility will be based on whether it makes sense that grant plus outside funding will fund that expedition. Because if there's a massive funding gap in a relatively small amount of time, then it's hard for us to rate that super highly in terms of feasibility. So ethical considerations. There is a section of the application that asks grantees to air any ethical considerations that may be part of the expedition. Now, this may be a bit counterintuitive, because one would say, oh, well, I wouldn't propose an unethical expedition. Why would I put that forward? But this is more to show that the grantee or the applicant has thought about all the possible ethical sensitivities that could come up in the expedition. So we actually assume that any expedition could have some sensitivity in the project. And we actually like to see that the grantees have considered these sensitivities, whether it is dealing with human remains, whether it is dealing with ancient artifacts that may need to be removed, especially with sampling or tagging of of live animals. So the more in-depth this is, the more that we actually appreciate and show and think that the applicant has showed their thoughtfulness and their responsibility in thinking about any possible scenario. So now is to hint towards some of the benefits, which I think are many. And like I said, as a former grantee myself, I think most of the benefits of the expedition was the amazing community that you become a part of. Grantees are given a free year of membership, and there are different levels, and I won't get into the whole thing that is membership that's on the explorers.org website, but that's all to say it's an amazing opportunity. That said, grantees are only eligible for that one free year of membership until they've written their report on completion of their expedition. And each different program has slightly different media requirements, but these are usually not too onerous. There's, even for the largest discovery grant, it's something under 10 minutes of video clips and 7 to 10 images minimum. Obviously they can be much more. Other programs as well have some minimum, but that's all in order for the Explorers Club and our partners to promote you and your expedition. So this is not asking you to become photographers and filmmakers, but just in order to have some media to share what you're doing. And that another big perk of the turning in the report and all of the media is the eligibility to be selected for the ECAD Grantee Symposium. So last year we were able to fly out and host several of our grantees who were selected from the group. So it's not guaranteeing that you will be selected for the ECAD Symposium, but it makes you eligible. And I will tell you, ECAD is one of the most incredible experiences, and being able to be there to share your research is even more amazing, I would say. But beyond just the ECAD public presentation, grantees are required to do 3 public presentations of some kind, including at least one virtual classroom presentation. And we have an education partner called Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, which is run by one of our board members, Joe Grabowski, who does great work connecting students to explorers virtually, because it's not that easy. We don't expect our grantees to know exactly how to coordinate with schools and do all of that work, but we have a great partner who can help with that. So one part of the application are recommendation letters. For anyone who's applied to university or college, or jobs, employment, this is a familiar thing, but in terms of just creating the information that's out there and equitable so we can all have a more even shot, strong letters should describe the ability of the applicant to organize and manage the project outcomes. Because your team members may know your expedition very, very well and know you, it is totally acceptable to have a team member write your recommendation letter, but I would say it's stronger not to have all of your recommendation letters come from teammates, because they're directly benefiting, and maybe there's they can be quite objective, but it's also good to have a more outside view, like a mentor or somebody from an past organization that you've worked with, or someone you've worked with who can speak to your merits as an explorer or researcher. The stronger recommendations are written by folks who do have an expertise in that area. So they may be a well-established member of the Explorers Club. That's fantastic. It's great to have member support or member leadership or club leadership be in support of your expedition. But most of all, specific expertise and the ability for them to judge what you are doing is very important. So here's just some odds and ends, some tips. I would say in the title and the short description to avoid discipline-specific jargon. We do have reviewers that have discipline knowledge for that area of field research, but how some of these things are in your particular area, there may be very, very specific terms, which may make it less accessible for our reviewers and for some of the programs, especially to get those ones funded. Again, about the permits, even if you have not received them yet, being aware of the series of permits that are required. And like I said, most expeditions will require some kind of permit. So more ambitious projects will rate higher, and that sort of impact in creating new knowledge. What's the contribution to exploration? So going out and collecting field survey data is very important and part of how we grow our knowledge. If it happens to be extremely rare or hard to collect data, then yes, that will score high. But in comparison to an expedition or project that's going after a really tough question, as opposed to just sort of adding a few more data points, we are going to rate the one that is going after the more difficult question slightly higher. I've mentioned you can be a member of an expedition and apply to the grant to fund your portion of that trip. That's something that many of the programs do service. Projects with strong in-country collaborators or led by local researchers, or have somebody on the team who is a local researchers will rate higher in feasibility and overall. There is this concept of parachute science of going into areas and collecting a little bit of data, coming back out, not being tied in with the individuals, organizations, institutions, which in some very remote places there may not be as many, but at least having strong local support is something that the Explorers Club strives for. And some of our programs specifically target supporting explorers who are from local communities or indigenous in background. So that is for certain grants, that is even more rated higher. But for all programs, we emphasize the importance of collaborating with communities to do these expeditions. So in terms of my closing thoughts, and I've talked quite a bit, I will say if the application was not accepted, if you're tuning in and you have applied before and been rejected, I will say, as somebody who's been rejected myself, it's worth applying again, probably with the slightly modified or changed expedition idea. Feel free to reach out for feedback. We will give as much feedback as we possibly can, although there's a certain bandwidth issue with that. But I think that there's, like I said, there are more qualified expeditions than we can fund. So most of our approval rates are for a given program are less than 5%. So it's very, very difficult to choose, and our reviewers do our best job to choose the most worthy expeditions. But the fact of the matter is that many worthy expeditions we are not able to fund. A plea in that same vein is that if there's anyone tuning in who would be interested in being a reviewer themselves, you can be part of one program, and that would not, you can be part of reviewing for one program, that is, and that does not recuse you from applying for funding yourself for other programs. So as long as you disclose that you are applying for, say, a Rolex grant, you can serve in the Fjallraven Review Committee. We really need committee reviewers. We try to hook you up with some Explorers Club merch and our endless thanks, because we really rely on our members and our volunteers to get through these applications, and we really depend on expertise of our membership in that given field science discipline. I mean, we do need reviewers who know what they're looking at and what they're talking about. But please, even if you have a slight inclination for getting involved as a reviewer, please reach out to me. Or grants@explorers.org or Emerald Nash, enash@explorers.org. Emerald, like I said in the beginning, is our wonderful and amazing director of grants, or me, of course, Trevor Wallace at explorers.org. I will try to respond to everyone who reaches out. And yeah, I think we will move on to questions. I'm just going to pull up the Q&A. And yeah. So Kevin, did we get all of those ones that were in the chat box in the Q&A box so I can answer these?
You are good to go, man. There's a few that are redundant, so you can probably just plow through them, but you're up to 55. And a few I answered myself, but they were just pretty straightforward.
Great. Thanks so much, Kev. I'll get through these as efficiently as I can, but thoroughly. So from Bill Steele, are there any grants available for existing long-term projects that have a long history of carrying the Explorers Club flag? We have 12 times in the past 40 years. We're having a very difficult time finding support for original exploration of one of the most world's magnificent caves. So speleology, cave exploration is definitely something that we fund. Our review committees are separate from the flags, but that is to say that the flag receiving a flag to carry is an honor and is definitely a marker that it is a very quality expedition. And I highly encourage you, Bill, to apply for any one of our grants that you feel like would fit in, whether it's you have younger expedition team members that could get funded, or maybe some of them would apply to some of our larger grant opportunities. So yes, that is Bill's question. And then to Gerardo Soto, can you apply for more than one grant opportunity? Yes, you can. So you can apply with the same expedition for multiple programs, and you can apply with different expeditions to multiple programs, but you cannot stack the funding from different programs. So I hope that's clear. It's a little confusing, but so if have one expedition, say, to do some cave exploration with Bill, you would not be able to receive Rolex, Fjallraven, and an Exodus grants all for the same thing. You could apply for each one of those programs, but you would only be chosen for one. So the next question is from Abigail Cannon. Could you please specifically say what grants are available for people who are 35 plus? So I'll just go back to my little chart. So Exploration Fund, Rolex, Exodus, Fjallraven, and Discovery. So that is Abigail's question. Karina Aberg, I apologize in advance if I mispronounce anybody's name. Is this the first year the Stevenson Explorers Advancement Fund grant is being given out for marine science? This is the second year, and in the past year, it was also given out for marine science projects. So this is the second year. Satish Venkatesh, if you turn 35 in the next year, can you still qualify for the under 35 grants? I will say yes. We're relatively reasonable about those age requirements, but I will say that the age requirements for the grants are usually a sponsor specification for the parameters that they have put forward for their grants. So that's not usually coming from us. An anonymous attendee, do we need to be a member or fellow in order to be considered? No. Doesn't hurt though. What kinds of projects have they funded in the past? Another one from Karina. Maybe this was in in response to Stevenson grants, the C grants, which was 2 coral related projects, one with more of a community education standpoint around coral conservation, and one which was about 3D modeling in coral and coral revitalization. I mentioned Neha's project, which was on iDNA. These are marine science projects, and how many are expected to be funded? So the C grants is 4. Exploration fund is around 50. We usually approve 3 to 5. Hopefully we've approved as many as 10 per cycle with the discovery grants. There are 2 Fjallraven grants. Trying to think. There are 5 Rolex grants. There are 3 to 4 Adventure Canada Young Explorers each year, depending on how many. That one, like I said, is not open currently. And there are 50 Rising Explore Youth Activity Fund grants. Okay. August Calabro, another 35-year-old. Say if you're 35, then you can still apply. Maria Guerra, same question about the age. Andrew Piatowski submitted a petition for discovery grant. First step was accepted. Yes. So I think I spoke with Andrew the other day on the phone. So when your pre-application is approved, you will get a link to submit a full application. And so what Andrew needs to get to do that now that his pre-application was approved, but then the link probably expired because the application had passed and the expedition had passed, postponed due to COVID. So he just needs to get in contact with grants@explorers.org and explain his situation, take a screenshot of the approved pre-application and give you a new link for the full application. Is there a max or a minimum on the funded study? So yes and no. For certain grants, like there are, like the discovery grant, I know for a fact that it's not longer than a year, but we recognize that many field research campaigns are multiple years, and usually the lifespan of that given expedition will be less than a year, but grantees have applied as sort of a multi-part of that field research campaign. Maybe the first field visit will be funded by that particular grant. The minimum, technically no, but in terms of being able to truly bring back new knowledge, if it's only 5 days, I mean, if you're going to space for 5 days, then maybe that is an exception. But for the most part, usually there is not a minimum of the funded study. The next question is from Dove. Why are the majority of grants only for 35 and under when most of our members are 35 and over? So that is actually a misconception. So there are more programs that have a stipulation about age, but the majority of our funding in the past few years has gone to explorers that are over 35. And the reason that our sponsored programs such as Rolex or Fjallraven or even our endowed grant of Rising Explorer, why do they want to support people directly through a grant at a younger age is because younger people might not have the opportunity to access other types of funding, and they want to help them get their career started. But that is why we started the Exploration Without Boundaries grant, is because there are explorers who start their careers later. The second question, applied for 2 offered, and didn't hear back from 1. So everybody who has fully submitted a grant should hear back before the gala, before ECAD. We usually try to respond to all inquiries, but please be patient and also persistent in terms of the response time. From Gabriela Dejas, when applying for the Discovery Channel grant, are there limitations of funding from other organizations? So there are from other research institutions, say National Science Foundation or a given school, that's fine. But because of the Discovery grant having a media component to it, for example, a National Geographic grant, you would have to choose whether you went with National Geographic or Discovery Channel, that particular program, because like the Discovery program, National Geographic has very stringent media requirements and contracts that they have their grantees sign. I would like to think that ours, and I actually, in comparing side by side, think that ours are a little bit more generous with our Discovery Channel program in terms of the rights of first refusal and the time period on the media. But that is something that comes from our sponsors, but also based on the contracts that other funders may sign. So if there is other funding, we just usually ask to see which organizations and what other obligations are due to the other grants or funding. Is it possible to apply for 2 different Explorers Club grants in the same year for the same project if they fit the scope of my project and qualification level, i.e. Rolex and Stevenson? Yes. To Elizabeth Kroger's question, yes, you can, but like I said, you will not be able to get both of those. And I would not, for example, since they're both $10,000 grants, I wouldn't submit your budget as a $20,000 expedition and apply to both and expect to get both. And in fact, if there isn't already another funding source hinted at, it would sort of lessen the feasibility of that if there was a small turnaround in time, because that extra 10 grand you would have to get is not going to be coming both from the Explorers Club. Mark Alio, perhaps an illusion, but noticing that many grants seem oriented towards students and younger folk comment. So like I said, the stipulations usually come from our brand sponsors, which offer us money. So we're usually going to take it, and they are quite open with the types of grants that they want to give, but they usually, and for whatever reason, probably, like I said, to support people earlier in their careers when they haven't had the time to sort of get established in the field or build a foundation or been an established member in the club, where there are many amazing opportunities to meet people who want to fund privately or through their foundations. A grant is a great step in the door. I think that probably answers that question. Alyssa Kwan, I'm curious how you define exploration and how are you supporting anti-colonial efforts in doing so? So I think this is a very important question. I think that I think exploration is kind of like art. Different people define it in different ways. I think if you ask different members of the Explorers Club, they might define it in kind of drastically different ways. And for me, and at least on the Venn diagram of what my definition and the definition of what our grants have funded, is going out and bringing back knowledge from the field. And like I said, the idea of the field is a subjective idea. The field could be one's own backyard. It could be one's own culture, as opposed to this exotic colonial idea of investigating other cultures. And so part of the work that we're doing is when I became vice president of research and education, is to collect demographic data on who our explorers are and trying to make it less of a parachute science, colonial endeavor of conquering or utilizing the data found in countries in the global south or countries that may not have the same power, institutional, or resources for the betterment of the organization. So I think that we are making strides. I think it's a continuous process to make our grants more accessible. And in a lot of ways, our diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, which I'm also a member of, has been also addressing the history of the club. In past, the idea of an explorer was part of the colonial apparatus to go out and identify resources, study them, create scientific understanding of these resources and exploit them. Whereas now it's about curiosity and really giving new knowledge to our human species. So I'm sorry about that. I just had to answer something. So Samuel Awini, I was awarded the Rising Explorers Grant in 2020. And after my research, I applied to become a member, but I never got my approval or response. I followed up with a couple of emails, but didn't get any feedback. What should I do? Sorry about that, Samuel. Follow up again. We'll definitely get your membership processed. That is something we do. Our program has increased by tenfold in the past few years. So a lot of the back end work, we have had a lot of growth curves. So I, as a volunteer, do my best. We're mostly run by volunteers. Our paid staff members are few and overworked, to say the least, but they're extremely dedicated. So I apologize. I apologize for being remiss in not processing your membership, but we're really trying to, and I think that that's a big area of growth for us, is really getting our grantees to become members. Anonymous attendee, what percentage of grant applications are successful? It varies by program somewhat. It varies on the program somewhat, but it's less than 5% for all of them. Is to the best of my knowledge. Some of them are razor thin. And like I said, I've applied and been rejected multiple times from grants from the Explorers Club. So I know what it feels like. And it is, we're actively seeking out more funding so that our approval rates are not as small. So I'm just going to. For the letters of support and recommendations, should they solely be from outside of the project? For example, from a letter of support from an advisor on the project be valuable, or should these letters entirely come from third-party recommenders? Thank you. This is from Timothy Gardner. I would say, in my personal opinion, both. Somebody within the project who knows it extremely well, can speak to different aspects of it, is valuable insight, and then also as is also somebody outside of it who has maybe a little bit of a longer view of that applicants. Maybe they were a mentor early on and can show the trajectory of their growth as an explorer is also highly valuable. Is Rising Explorer also applicable to master's students? That is something that I'll have to get back from the committee head from Rising Explorers. Typically, it's undergraduate students, although I think here and there we have had slightly older students for that particular grant. But that particular grant is really looking at early career. But that's from Strechiasi Bista, and I will try to get a definitive answer, but I think so. John Lucas, when looking at the budget, must the grant make up 100% of the expedition budget, or can you have partners and funders? Yes, it does not. Well, it does not need to make up 100% of the expedition budget. absolutely, whether you have other non-competing grants, crowdfunding, personal funds. If there's a huge funding gap, and many other needed grants that are also competitive, that might factor into the feasibility rating somewhat. But that is, like I said, just one component of the score. Can you apply to multiple grants if eligible for the same project? I think answer that's from Jaster Bauer.
Hey, Trev, hold one sec.
Yep.
Just real quick, in the chat, Kristen Larson, no,
Yes.
the answer is no, only undergrads.
Okay, so that's helpful. I had thought there would have been older ones, but that makes sense. And Kristen, how often do we fund high school students? Maybe a couple every year, right?
Yeah, I'll let you know if she drops back an answer.
Okay.
I'm trying to click answered as you answer these, but they're coming in faster than you're answering them. So you're
Okay.
back up to 56.
Okay. Yeah. So I think John's question was pretty much answered. Jasper's as well. Anonymous attendee. Hi, I'm a PhD student doing human geography project in Tonga on sustainable fishing. Which grants should social scientists focus on? So human geography is a field discipline that would pretty much be applicable to any of those. So maybe not a Rising Explorer grant, but a exploration fund. This would fit very well for that. A Rolex grant, a Fjallraven grant. The social science fits into the frameworks of what we define as field research. John Lucas with the Discovery Grant, do they have first rights of refusal for all digital content? How this can be navigated with other sponsors and digital media deliverables. So yes, there's first rights of refusal, but there's a time period on that. So it's basically a year of first rights of refusal after the grant on digital content. And then the Discovery will have rights to the required media deliverables for the project. So that's the stills and some video clips, and how can this be navigated with other sponsors and digital media deliverables. I think what we encounter most often, and it's best just to head it off at the pass because they are the most comparable grant program with the most kind of conflicting contract details, which is National Geographic. So you cannot accept a grant, even if it's their early career grants or the Discovery Grant, those conflict. So that I hope that answers your question. Other funders, we kind of work on with the case-by-case basis, but we actually come into this quite often where National Geographic grants conflict with the Discovery grants.
Trevor, real quick, Kristen
Yep.
says only undergrads in high school for Rising Explorer, no master or PhDs every year, about 4 or 5 high school students.
Yeah, that was my understanding. So the anonymous attendee, can we apply to several grants and combine funds? No. Does applying to several Explorers Club grants take us out of consideration and lessen our chances? So no, it doesn't lessen your chances, but you cannot combine funds. Edgar Mason, can we, the grantees, have more impact on Explorers Club and Discover's social media and other platforms? So former grantees, we have been working hard to have a big impact in terms of our media partners. What they do with the media we provide them is up to them, though. They're, for example, with Discovery Channel or Rolex, they're these massive organizations that contribute to our 501c3, to our nonprofit, to fund science and field work, and there is no guarantee that there will be any media. They basically give the funding knowing that there will be science and a contribution to our knowledge and understanding as a species, without any sort of obligation on their end to make a TV show or anything else. Can grantees apply for membership at the club? That's also from Edgard. So yes, as I mentioned, if all of the deliverables, including the report and the 3 public presentations, and the media is turned in, grantees will get and submit their application. They will get a free year of membership at the club. Catherine Majewski, thank you so much for your presentation today. It's very exciting and helpful. I just wanted to ask what percentage of grant awardees are members of the club. It's a relatively small number, actually, surprisingly enough. You do not need to be a member to apply. Which I've mentioned before. From Kristen, I think it would be helpful to talk a little bit more about the video aspect. There's so many youth activity fund applicants can barely pay for food or gas or limited access to technology, and these are some of our most compelling modes of assistance. I completely agree, Kristen, and that's why the requirements of the Rising Explorers are very minimal, and that we don't penalize them for not turning them in. We only ask for any photos and videos they may have in order to promote them and support them, which for young explorers, especially around the world, who could use media to support their endeavors, that's incredibly important. All scientists and researchers to be able to access more grants, the more media that they can collect. Even the idea that it would be a requirement is important to communicate and help foster and mentor our grantees so that they can be competitive. But that is, yes, we don't have stringent requirements for our youth activity fund or Rising Explorer grantees. Anonymous attendee, my research interests have a conservation focus, so I'm primarily interested in applying for a Fjallraven grant. I'm also eligible for exploration fund grant, which seems to be from our general field work, and I apply to both grants using the same project description, how individually tailored they should be. So Fjallraven does have sort of their own taste for the natural sciences, but they have funded projects in archaeology. But that is to say that they do have they have funded mostly conservation projects. I think for these 2 programs, you wouldn't need to individually tailor them that much. I wouldn't do any extra work because they're mostly looking at the merits and goals and outcomes of your project. That are similar criteria and similar review. Just the final selection of the Fjallraven grant, they're just much fewer grantees. They're only 2 per year, whereas Exploration Fund is many more. From John Lower, if we're able to apply for more than one grant, do you recommend applying for multiple grants or just choosing one? No, I would encourage to apply for multiple grants. And I don't think that they necessarily need to be tailored so much. Just a lot of our sponsored grants, our partners have similar criteria that they're looking for. So that's just part of the amazing opportunity that we have to offer so many different grant programs. Brooke Fitzwater, on the final agreement page, do you just need to check mark each statement, or do you have to fill in something under the signature part? I tried to click under the signature part and could not. So this is definitely an emerald question. Sort of the nuts and bolts of the application portal. Sometimes it can be a little bit buggy, but we can definitely help facilitate that, Brooke. And sorry that you were having some difficulties with it. William O'Halloran, if you get a grant app that looks intriguing but may need some tweaking, is help available, or does the grant app have to fly as submitted? Unfortunately, we're not able to offer individual help. And we do grade and score for the most part each expedition based on what is submitted. Sometimes if it's a question of a permit or more information, we will ask for more information. But if the general intrigue of the grant, if it's the sort of the whole idea of it, then no. But if there's something that looks somewhat incomplete, from where possible, we will ask the grantee to provide more information. But we don't actively, it wouldn't be fair for us to necessarily help qualitatively. Stacia Carrington, what is the turnaround time between application and due date and funding? So typically we do need time to review all of these. So we try to announce the grants by ECAD. And oftentimes we're working overtime and we do not have enough reviewers. So we're having to extend the grant announcements and the dispersals. But usually it's about 3 months of turnaround time. Sometimes less. So getting to Eldridge Wisely, I see you have funded a lot of environmental DNA related expedition, water and leeches. Are you getting tired of eDNA proposals? eDNA is popular right now, sort of like a hot research method. That just happened to pop up in the examples of the explorers that I used in the presentation. I don't think it's necessarily representative of all of, we don't have like, any overwhelming percentage. I think that just happened to be the ones that I thought would be, would spice up the presentation. It had good readily available photos and explorers that I knew, and some of the ones that I was more familiar with. I will say that some of the COVIDization of research, of looking at the impacts of COVID on conservation or this or that, is it seems a little bit of just sort of a catch-all and kind of a buzzword that has started to die down, but we don't typically we haven't funded a lot of those type of projects. Elizabeth Kroger, what information should we include on the CV that we submit? Education, work experience, publication, previous grants received, etc. That's actually quite a good rundown of what you should include on your CV. Is your education, the different projects you've done, possibly previous expeditions. I think, yes, I think you listed quite well what should be on the CV. Laura Jessup, can you apply for more than one grant project for the same project in the same year? Yes, but like I said, you only get one of those grants. Allison Haynes, can you elaborate more on applying for grants in China? There's not a lot to elaborate on because of OFAC. We cannot fund any research in China at all with our nonprofit status or Chinese citizens. We were able to in the past, but that is, that's kind of across the board that nonprofits are not allowed to do that. Anonymous attendee, are there rubrics available for us to see on how we are judged? Right now, the criteria that I listed on this slide is the rubric that we used, which is, which is contribution to science and exploration, methods and approach and feasibility, and then storytelling for those ones that are more storytelling focused. Can the grants fund visas for travel where necessary, from Sarah Harris? Yes, it can cover visa costs. Sorry, Kevin, I think I skipped one. There was one that about a budget question that I actually skipped over. Elena Blanco, hi, can the project combine research with an educational program for underrepresented youth? Yes, we actually require and encourage some education and outreach, working with communities as aspects. Projects that are entirely, are sort of a case-by-case basis, but short answer is yes.
All right, real quick, Jeff. If the
Yes.
budget is higher, but you are combining with other grants, should you specify that in your budget?
Yeah, so in the application itself, there is 2 columns for there are different columns that will indicate your funding sources, secured, pending, and so we can judge fairly on how feasible it is for you to raise or how much you've already raised from different funding sources. Thanks, Kev. Hi, are there any price restrictions on the equipment you want to buy for the expedition? Thanks. Yeah, so that relates to kind of the non-expendables. So yeah, we also kind of do this on a case-by-case basis. If you, for example, need a drone to do survey work, it's all in the rationale that you put forward. But if your entire budget is a car that would ostensibly be your personal car, then probably not. Or a very expensive lens to go shoot photographs, you would have to make a very strong case that you need that in order to bring back the knowledge and data information for your given project, and that we're not really in the business of just funding the tools that you may need in and outside the proposed expedition. Satya Goncho, where should I apply to review? On explorers.org, there's a tab for grants. So I'm just going to go there myself and kind of go through the little navigation. It's under funding. So if you go down in the funding tab and you go into grants on the explorers.org, and that is explorers.org/grants. So Alyssa Kwan, for recommendation letters, do we submit directly to the portal, or is there a direct link that the recommenders should submit to? Currently, we have you submit the recommendation letters. There are some types of grants and for university applications where it's anonymous, but in our case, it is submitted by you. Adrian Macido, should proposals be more focused on the science or the storytelling? So that depends on the grant, but I will say even for the most storytelling focused grants like the Discovery Grant, the foundation of it must be in the science itself. It has to have that as the foundation of it for the purpose of the storytelling. We're not funding film proposals, and ones that are more on the film side or documentation side are rarer that we fund. For Discovery and for other programs, they will because it's a pretty different criteria if you were applying to grants that are for films or for filmmaking or for media than it is for field science. So they're kind of comparing apples and oranges, although there's a little bit of overlap, like I said, with particular programs that we do take into account. Hope that answered your question. Kira McClelland, in the Rolex application, I didn't see anywhere to include extra information beyond a 200-word abstract. Also, I didn't see anywhere to include a budget other than supplementary materials in the region. Is that correct? Have I missed something? I think, Kira, you have missed the project description. I would send an email to grants@explorers.org because I think that there's some part of the application portal that you're probably missing. Melissa Noggle, do any of these grants fund lab work associated with the project that is highly field oriented? Like if I have a field expedition that is largely funded, but would like to apply to Explorers Club grants to support the lab work that follows that expedition. That's a tricky one. Like I said previously, we have not funded expeditions that are only lab work, but I would say yes, that seems like because it is connected with field work that you were doing, that would be something that we would be willing to consider. But it may not be scored as highly as others. Just like on the flip side of that coin, if there was an expedition that was, very little actual analysis of that data, or just collecting a bunch with no real question, it might not rate as highly. Adrian Macedo, are projects in exotic places more likely to get funded than projects in the US? Nope. Though exploration may have a veneer of the exotic and foreign, that's not what we do. What was it? I think it was Robert Louis Stevenson said there are no foreign lands, only the traveler is foreign. So, doing projects that are worthwhile, that are adding to our knowledge in your own backyard, and oftentimes we will be looking more for that than necessarily somebody's trip to an exotic place that they seem like has been on their bucket list, something like that. Peter Billman, is there any penalty for within country research if it still includes strong field exploration component? Thanks. I think that was pretty much answered in my last one. Are there connective themes in grant funding that TEC favors over other example, climate change, man, Scott, polar regions, etc.? No, some of the sponsored programs, such as Rolex at some points has had more of marine science, or their perpetual planet, which you can read more about on their website of what perpetual planet is. And Fjallraven, as other folks have noticed, has a more of a conservation bent, but I think that they, in working with us, have always wanted to keep it broad, because if there is an application that is incredible, that is beyond, outside of those, they don't want to miss out on it. So the application themes and disciplines that they accept are quite broad. Abigail Cannon, Rolex Explorer says young explorer under the age of 35 on their website. Has that been changed? Yes, so I believe that is, yes, so that is under 35. And I think, yeah, that did sort of conflict with what I said, which was undergrad and postdoc. But yes, a lot of the sponsored grants do have age requirements, and that is a stipulation that they have put forward. Anonymous attendee, can grants go towards a reasonable salary and or prior incurred expensive flights? Project starts before grants are awarded. So I would say prior incurred expenses, no. Salaries, for example, of research assistants in the past, or for example, a boat driver to hire somebody, yes, that is something that can be awarded, but just the salary for doing the work we don't typically fund. Allison Haynes, can you elaborate on storytelling requirements versus scientific research for grants? Can storytelling, filmmaking, and photography work be supported without an official scientific research component? So for most of our grant programs, no. Most of them are scientific fieldwork grants. They're the Discovery Grant in support, as well as the Exodus Grant, in support of furthering our knowledge. How that is defined is, again, on a case by case. Doesn't have to have sort of hardcore data collection at its core. But yeah, so like film pitches, we don't typically have as part of our programs. there's usually some sort of scientific research that's being done in tandem with the storytelling. So a good combination is, filmmakers or storytellers working with scientists, but on a case-by-case basis with Exodus as well as Discovery. There have been projects that have been working. For example, Asha Stewart's with the Himba people. She is trained as an anthropologist, but it was mostly a film project that she was going and documenting and doing interviews with Himba women about their resilience in climate change. So her training as an anthropologist, but then her sort of later career decisions as a filmmaker made her a good fit for the Discovery grant that she was awarded. But those are rarer and more competitive.
Trevor, real quick, I clicked
Yep.
past one, and I have one through YouTube actually.
Oh, cool.
I was wondering, what is the longest time frame an expedition can be funded for?
So we have funded multi-year. We've given grants for projects that will take more than a year, but we do expect that the reports are due by the following cycle. So if it's going to help support something that's going over the next few years, we understand that, but we do expect within the following calendar year that there will be some results from that given expedition will be reported back in those grantee requirements.
Cool. And the one on YouTube is from Andrew Fulmer. He is an independent researcher, ECR, working as a PI. So as the PI, he's saying, from whom should we get recommendations?
So for example, some people in the area of your field site or a previous somebody that you've previously worked with, somebody who would know you and could speak to your character and your work and your research from that perspective. They don't necessarily need to be part of your team. It's more the issue is more with only having reviewers who are part of your team, as opposed to, I think the strongest combination is probably somebody who is sort of close to what you are doing and knows it very, very closely, and somebody who's a little bit farther removed. But two people who are farther removed is a common combination that we do see in recommendation letters and can be very compelling.
Cool. Good to go back to Q&A.
Cool. Sadie Ridling, can we see which projects were funded in previous years? So on our website, we have some highlights of grantees, and we're working actually on a publication to hope to release in the next year. We have funded many projects. And for some of the sponsor grants, you can see their individual profiles. For the Discovery grants, actually on the Discovery website, they have individual profiles for the grantees. So I hope that's helpful, but I think this might get a little bit difficult in the weeds on that one. But that actually is something that we're trying to do a better job at, is publicly posting and acknowledging and having a way to see which projects the Explorers Club has funded. Is there any consideration for a research program on largest brackish water lake of Asia, Chilka Lake, located? I did my PhD. Possible. I'm a citizen of USA staying at Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a senior citizen and I want to help 2 or 3 students and younger biologists through this project. So this is from Nalini Putnaik, who so the 2 to 3 students could apply for grants, as well as you are eligible to apply for these grants as well. I would have to see a full application to know, but it's on the broad strokes of it. It seems like something that would fall within the definition of field work as the Explorers Club defines it, and something similar to things that we have funded in the past. John Lucas. So the grant can fund part 2 of a multi-part expedition. It does not have to be part 1. on the multi-part funding program. So as long as there are no competing funders from previous expeditions, it can absolutely be a part two. In fact, sometimes part two, the expeditions can be more developed at that point, and can give a fuller view of the feasibility and goals of those multiple parts. Anonymous attendee, for the Adventure Canada grant, can we apply for it going south and Antarctica, or it has to be more north? So the Adventure Canada has not brought young explorers on any of their Antarctic cruises. If you go to their website, they go to Galapagos and a couple other locations, Haida Gwaii on the west coast in a smaller sailing vessel. So far, they have done some of their Scotland slowly, I believe, and their Iceland circumnavigation have brought young explorers, and they may change, but from my understanding, they won't be bringing any researchers down to Antarctica. And I believe that actually they use a separate, they kind of subcontract that, those voyages. Adrian Macedo, should the proposals be written in a scientific focus and format, or more focused on storytelling to the person's experience? So I'd say it depends on the project, but I would say for the most part, it should be a fairly scientific focus. And in terms of the longer and focus on the goals, the scientific research goals of the expedition. And if it's relevant, to include some personal or narrative aspects. And then, of course, like I said, in Discovery or Exodus, those storytelling aspects might be more enhanced. Margarita Lakusik, when will the results be available for the grants for which the application closes the 15th of November, or else the funds paid directly through the personal bank account, or they go through some institution? So like I said, should be 3 months or so turnaround, and we do not pay through institutions. We only pay through grantees. I know there are some universities that require you to have grant monies go through them and them to collect an administrative fee, but we do not disperse funds that way. Everastus Obura, just wondering whether in a school situation, the members of an environmental club could apply as collaborators, or must the application be done by an individual? So we often have teams, but there's usually a team member who is in an expedition leader position, who is going to be given the grant. Just for logistical and dispersal purposes, there needs to be one person who is the main applicant, but it can be for a group of people. Which grants have the highest and lowest acceptance rate? So off the top of my head, I think it's easy to say that the Discovery grants are definitely the most competitive. The Rolex and Fjallraven grants, I think, are close. I mean, they're all very close. The Exploration Without Boundaries is quite competitive. I think we are able to give more grants through our Exploration Fund and Youth Activity Fund, but they're also quite competitive. But I will say the Discovery grants are by far the most competitive. Can we volunteer to review? Oh, John Lower, sorry. Almost skipped that one. How many pages are the project descriptions proposals? Typically, are we encouraged or discouraged to use citations and a bibliography? Definitely fine to include citations. They're not super long. It's generally 1 page, 1,500 words tops for the proposals. We try to keep them fairly streamlined and not overly long. Anonymous attendee, can we volunteer to review grant applications without being members? Sometimes we will have non-members if we really need a specific discipline. We do prefer to use members to review grants. I would also encourage whoever wrote this to become a member, because I think the benefits of reviewing the grants and being part of this community. So from Brooke Fitzwater, I'm currently applying to many non-EC grants in the same time for the same project. I've already won one. Congratulations. Does the application to many grants negatively affect submission? Definitely not. People combine funding often. The fact that you've won it is actually a good sign for your project, and a part of, we can see that it's going to be feasible as long as there's not competing obligations for the grants. The more funding, the better. And we're really excited that that grantees can navigate the difficulty of putting together different grants. Brian Fry, can we vary the budget a bit between pre-application and full application? I learned today that 40K is the average, not the ceiling for the budget. I had to cut 10K lab component genetic sequencing for critters collected from deep within the cave, but the pre-application, the budget down to 40K. Yes, it is possible to add that. And sorry for the sort of misunderstanding that 40,000 was the maximum. No, that is the average. If phase 1 of a project is funded by Nat Geo, can phase 2 be funded by an EC grant? Is it just a Nat Geo and Discovery grants, or is it Nat Geo and any EC grant? This is from Zar Alfi. No, it was primarily the Discovery grant. And that there are still kind of basic media requirements, but they're not usually our other grant programs. They don't have conflicting ones, but it is with the Discovery grant, it's definitely a no-go if the phase 1 is funded by Nat Geo. It most of the time, and we do kind of check it on a case-by-case basis, but most of the time it does not work out to fund projects. John Lucas, you mentioned that some countries cannot get funding. You see China. I wanted to ask, if you receive funding, must the money go into our expedition company NGO account? Do you have requirements on this? No, usually, like I said, we cannot give through institutions. And I encourage you to look at the OFAC, that's OFAC countries list on the US government website. Adrian Macedo, if our application is rejected, can we receive feedback on how to improve? Like I said, this is something that we would love to do with all of them. And we will try to give some feedback if you reach out to us. But it's, like we said, it's sort of 95% of the work that we do is volunteer led. So we're a little bit thin on the administration side, but yes, we will do our best to give feedback. Nathan Smith, the funds must be used by the end of the application, or the end of the expedition dates that are put forward in the budget or in the application. And if the expedition dates change, then that must be communicated to us. Over COVID, we had many postponed expeditions, and we were able to make good on those funding commitments. But yeah. Stacia, another question. If we are a PhD researcher, the budget cannot include any sort of salary. I know in other foundation grants, you're able to do this. No, usually we do not pay salaries through our grants. And yeah, we particularly not the foundation. Adrian Macedo. Wait, no, sorry. This is sort of Kira McClelland. My living situation in the field is covered in kind by my collaborators, but would I be able to use the funds from the grant to cover living expenses at home, e.g. rent? No. Unless, well, so if the expedition was, no, we don't cover rent usually. There would have to be a very like specific situation, but short answer would be no, for covering expenses at home. Anonymous attendee, can funds go towards onboard costs of the exploratory trip that a tuition portion as well as room and board aboard a research vessel? It depends what type of research vessel. And it depends in, like, we don't fund other, like, we would not fund like an education program that would be like a study abroad or education program offered through another institution. If it's a field school, but there was like real research being done in that given field school, that could be different, but you would have to look in the specifics of that one. Margarita Lacusic, in case of our expedition in the embargoed country, do we need to have the OFAC license at the time of the application, or could we submit it later? In the case of receiving the grant, thank you for so much. And thank you, Margarita, for tuning in. I'm not aware of an OFAC license. It's more a list. It's more a list of countries that we just simply cannot fund expedition in those countries. So unfortunately, if it's in the embargo country, we can't usually approve those. So Angra Alfian, one of our amazing discovery grantees, can grantees previously apply to the same different grant with the different project? Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I think that's all our questions. Were there any other, Kev, in the chat box?
I have some very lovely comments from people thanking you in the chat, and same with YouTube. But otherwise, that is all the questions.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
101 questions answered.
There we go. Get all of them. Oh, I did see this one, the Brian Fry. The webpage is a bit unclear about the involvement of Discovery Channel with an expedition where it wasn't a requirement, but it was encouraged.
Oh, I answered that in chat.
Oh, okay.
I wrote him an answer in the chat.
Great. Well, like I said, my email is trevorwallace@explorers.org. And so if you have any additional questions or ideas, please reach out to me. Please reach out to Emerald as well. She's really doing the heavy lifting. She is a rock star. That's enash@explorers.org or grants@explorers.org. And I really wish you all the best of luck. And then again, massive thank you to all of our volunteers that help us review. Please get back to me if you're interested in being a reviewer, helping volunteer. This is amazing. We have incredible Explorers Club members that make all of this possible. I am just the whatever face of this, trying to give a brief or not so brief overview of all of this. And I hope it was helpful, and hope to hear the amazing stories of your expeditions coming back from the field.